Hello, everyone. This is Jennifer Deli with WinBiz Proposals. We'll get started in just a minute. I'm going to give a few more participants a chance to dial in. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And as I mentioned, my name is Jennifer Deli. I hope everyone can hear me. Everyone who's participating is on mute, but we're going to use chat when you have questions. So let me just start by giving a little demo. I'm going to send a message to everyone. And I know my typing is really loud when I'm presenting, but on your screen, you should see a little, in the ribbon up above, there should be a little chat flash, or you had a window pop up, and I just sent a message to everyone saying, hi, everyone. So if you have questions during the presentation, please type your questions, and we'll answer them at the end, and if we have time, we'll open up the audio as well so that we can have a deeper conversation. But I want to thank you for joining us today for the first of our 2018 Quick Hitter webinar series. The first one is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and that is about running a successful virtual team. Now, I'm going to strive to keep this to about 30 minutes or so. So we'll do about 25 minutes. Quick and dirty, I gave this presentation a few months ago at APMP, and it was actually an hour long with a pretty deep conversation. So if I breeze through anything too fast, just follow up with me afterwards. I'm happy to answer your questions. And we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes for questions at the end of this as well. So before we go much further, I just want to briefly introduce myself. As I mentioned, Jennifer Deli. I'm the CEO of WinBiz Proposals, and I do recognize some familiar names dialing in, so we've got some friends and colleagues dialing in as well. I have over 20 years experience in business development and consulting experience in government services. So I've worked on Capitol Hill, I've worked in the federal contracting community, and I started my business about 6 years ago working specifically with small and mid-sized government contractors to help them write better proposals and win more business. So when I'm not working on my own business, I'm coaching other businesses, which is extremely gratifying. I'm actively involved in a global organization called Entrepreneurs Organization and other government contracting firms in the region. Now, I will say that even though I come from a government contracting background, this presentation about virtual teams is not specific to proposals, it's not specific to GovCon, and frankly, a lot of these best practices apply to being an efficient organization, whether you're virtual or not. So what does a 100% virtual by design company look like? Now, when I started my company, I did from the very beginning say, this is going to be virtual, and we're going to talk about the reasons why. But the main thing that you find with a virtual company is that it can be distributed geographically. So this is just a snapshot. My team is literally all over the country. My director of operations is in California. And even though a lot of my consultants are in the Metro DC region close to me, we have key personnel in many different states and many different time zones. So in addition to being able to access personnel anywhere, one of the main benefits of having a virtual by design company is that you also have lower overhead. Obvious things like rent and utilities, leases, things like that, but also IT. As a virtual company, our policy is a bring your own device policy, which means that each of our staff, each of our consultants use the laptop and the phones and the printers at their disposal that they're used to. We do set standards for what kind of software and what kind of virus protection they need, but otherwise we don't have to carry that overhead, and we don't have to constantly refresh technology. Another thing that a virtual by design company looks like is that it reflects our clients' needs. So in our case, we do have clients across the country and across the DC region, which is made up of 3 states plus Delaware, West Virginia, even Pennsylvania. So that whole East Eastern Seaboard really is what I would consider the Metro DC area. And because we have consultants and clients all over the region, it really doesn't matter if they're in the same state or not. If they're an hour away from each other or 10 minutes away, we're able to meet their needs by working virtually. And I will be honest that at one point, actually multiple times throughout the life of my company, I've had that temptation thinking, okay, I need to have an office. We need a sign on the outside of a door in order to be a legitimate company, you know, a big girl company. And really when it comes down to it, every time I run that analysis, I determine that being virtual by design is not only more efficient and more effective, but really those offices would probably sit empty most of the time anyways, because if we are meeting with our clients, we're meeting in their space, not ours. And then finally, really it comes back to meeting our own needs. So as a business owner, as a wife, as a mother, as an active member of my community, I prefer to work from home where I don't have a long commute. I can use that time engaged in those other activities. I don't have to wear a suit every day. Today, I'll be honest, I'm wearing a scarf with a nice sweater, but there are jeans on. I'm not wearing high heels. I can be comfortable in my work environment. I don't have to ride the metro or sit in traffic. And fundamentally, it gives me that work-life balance that I'm seeking in my life and that probably you and people in your organization are seeking as well. And that last item on there, environmentally friendly. Now, no matter how you feel about the spectrum when it comes to environmentally friendly policies, I think everybody can agree that if it makes sense, it's worth it. Now, we feel so strongly about this that we were actually recently quoted in Forbes magazine online after we did a quick analysis of how much even we as a small company can save in environmental impact by being virtual. So this article happened to be about attracting and retaining millennials. Millennials demographically do care strongly about environmental impact, and we found that our consultants and our employees save at least $1,200 a year on average in commuting costs. That might be wear and tear on your car, that might be gas and tolls, not to mention the time and pain and suffering of sitting in traffic and missing your kid's soccer game because you're stuck in traffic and things like that. So we're really excited that we can make that impact in our own lives and have that environmental benefit as well. So it's not just us that feel strongly about working virtually. We see that the Bureau of Labor Statistics and a lot of other organizations out there, both government and non-governmental organizations, are really tracking the data on working remotely and working virtually. So the BLS has, their latest data is from 2015, and you can see the trend there going way back, I think it's 2006, that shows that the trend is creeping up, and it's in all industries, the opportunity to work virtually. Even in organizations that do manufacturing and direct customer service, oftentimes have some virtual work options available for their workforce. And it's no surprise that in professional services, primarily more white collar management types of occupations, you see almost 40% back in 2015 working in a virtual environment. And I would actually hazard to guess that those numbers are probably even higher in 2017 and going into 2018. So, of course, one of the reasons why we're talking today is that just all sounds great and I want a piece of that pie, but there are some common objections to working virtually. So first and foremost, we hear things like, this is just not going to work in our culture. We really prefer the face-to-face, and it's so much easier to walk down the hall than to have to craft an email or call you up on the phone. And then managers often say, well, how am I going to know what everybody is doing? You know, how am I going to know that John is on task with, if I can't see him heads down at his computer? And then we also hear some concerns about the tools that are needed to work virtually. And in some environments that do require a high level of security, you may discover that you can't do that. But tools can be a little bit of a barrier, and we're going to talk through some ways to roll that out incrementally. And then we often hear things that, well, we're more efficient when we're face-to-face. Nothing works as good as getting in a room and locking the door and getting on a whiteboard and cranking out a solution together. Well, there are a lot of tools available in the market today that are either free or inexpensive that can recreate that war room environment easily. Now, that being said, of course, there are some legitimate reasons when virtual doesn't work. especially if you happen to be in the government contracting field. You might be working in a secure environment. You might be working in a classified environment. You might be working on site at a government space, which just is not going to allow it. They're requiring that physical proximity. And then, of course, if you do work in an industry that is mechanical or works with physical objects or prototypes, or you're working on computer hard drives, I mean, obviously you can't necessarily dial that in many cases. So let's not spend too much time talking about the objections, excuse me. Let's talk about how you can overcome those. And I've put together 10 ways to build a high-functioning virtual team. Now, these are from my own experience building my company. I'd love to hear what's working in yours as well. Now, 10 sounds like a lot, but they really bucket into these 3 major categories, which are color-coded here. Now, the first one is to be intentional, to focus on your people, to have the right environment, and to build a culture that works for a virtual team. I bucket these all together under the category of buy-in. Now, obviously, buy-in, we're gonna dive into that a little bit in a little bit here, but buy-in is really focused on bringing everybody together with that same vision. Then, of course, there's the 3 next categories deal with transparency, your meeting rhythm, and standard operating procedures. And I lump these together under the title of communication. And we're always hearing about communication, no matter what your work environment, how important it is. We're going to talk about that in the virtual world. And then finally, the last 3 are your tools, working in a cloud environment, and then having the back office support to make your functioning virtual team successful. And that all falls under the category of infrastructure. So let's talk about that first section of buy-in. Now, I call it being intentional, and that's a little bit of a buzzword right now, but I truly believe it. Being virtual as a company just doesn't work well if it's on the fly. I'm sure you've experienced before where you have one team member who says, oh, my child is sick today, or my car broke down, I need to work virtual. Well, if you haven't thought in advance of how to deal with that, you might find that they can't access their emails, they can't access their files, they can't dial into a bridge. Or if they haven't thought about it in advance, they'll find that they don't have a workspace in their home that's really conducive to being productive. So it does take a little bit of planning and visualization at the beginning. Now, as I mentioned before, I started my company from the ground up being virtual. Most people don't have that opportunity unless you're thinking of going out and starting your own company soon. And in that case, I applaud you and I'm happy to talk. But for those of you who are working for somebody else and you're looking to advocate for a more virtual environment, either on your project team, your proposal team, your department, your division, or company-wide, you might find that a phased roll-in is best. It might be department by department, it might be project by project, but you're going to want to think that out in advance and really plan out how you're going to move to more virtual. And then, of course, you're going to need buy-in at all levels of the organization. And I've shared there on the screen some questions to ask as you're thinking about rolling that out. Now, let's also talk about people. Now, it seems self-evident, but it is worth repeating that not everyone is cut out to work remotely. Some people really thrive on that face-to-face and they just don't feel productive without it. Some people really crave that interpersonal relationships in the office. Maybe they're not getting it at home and they really need that culture, someone to have lunch with. They need that environment to walk down the hall, and it really just gives them that buzz to be effective. That is absolutely great. And those people may not be the right fit if you have a totally virtual team, or they may do really well with just intermittent virtual work. Regardless, you're going to want to screen for those types of characteristics in any interview. And that can be an interview for a new hire, or that can be during annual evaluations or performance reviews, thinking about going virtual in the future. I've listed there some attributes for you for high functioning personnel characteristics that are going to make them successful. Another thing to think about when it comes to people is that if you are going to be working virtually, you should be interviewing and recruiting virtually. So it doesn't really reflect your future operating environment if you're having a face-to-face interview and you've only communicated by email, but your day-to-day work is going to be primarily over instant messaging and video meetings. So we moved out on doing all of our recruiting, all of our interviewing, either with our online tools or on video. And I'll tell you that it actually has helped us filter out people who just can't work well with the technology or just really are uncomfortable with, interviewing with a screen versus interviewing with a person over coffee. Now, of course, when it comes to setting that up from the beginning, you also want to think about your environment. And we've listed some do's and don'ts here for you. Again, a lot of these might be self-evident, but some of them are not. Now, it's tempting to think you're going to work in Starbucks all the time, but it's not going to be conducive to having private conversations and minimizing background noise. Even simple irritations like not having dedicated supplies, having your own printer or having a paper shredder and having to go pilfer throughout the house to try to find a highlighter or a working pen before a meeting, those can really reduce your productivity and just make it feel like you're not getting a successful environment at home. And then, of course, there's culture. And this really goes to some of those objections that I listed at the beginning of the presentation. You really need to make a shift in your culture that rewards productivity and not time card punching, and really move away from this environment where you think that if you can't see someone, they may not be working. Now, some of that just comes from trust, but some of that comes with setting up and using tools that can really enhance communication. We're going to talk about that in a second. And it's also important, I talked about people who really thrive in that face-to-face. If you are working in a virtual environment, you can create environments that replicate that. It may not be the same, it's never gonna replace that face-to-face 100%, but again, by using virtual environments, you can create that camaraderie that you wouldn't get otherwise. So let's move on and talk about communication, because that's something that I've really been focused on here. So transparency, I think, is number one. That out of sight, out of mind thing can really make people feel like the team is not cohesive, and it can make managers wonder what's being done when. So just like your best practices are with face-to-face, bring those to the online world. And I would say that one of them is to really be honest about your schedule and constraints. If you're working virtually, or if your team is working virtually, avoid the temptation to say, oh, I'm just going to skip out for a doctor's appointment. Nobody will ever notice. Be honest about when you're available and when you're not, and be honest about how you're going to shift your schedule to make up for those times. Those are real benefits to working remotely. The fact that you don't have to commute 45 minutes to get back to your child's pediatrician can be a real time saver, and it can be a real benefit if you're communicating with your team. And then, of course, you're going to want a team meeting rhythm. We use, one of the questions that comes up all the time is the daily huddle. If you're doing stand-up meetings and you're using a daily huddle, which is a best practice, well, how are you going to do that if you have somebody in California and you have somebody in Washington, D.C.? Well, one of the ways that we did it is we started using instant messaging for our daily huddle. And we cover 3 quick things. What did you do yesterday? What's on your plate today? And do you have any needs or barriers? And the way that we implemented it is that we told everybody in their individual time zone to post it by 9:30 a.m. Not 9 o'clock, not 8 a.m. We gave them a few extra minutes to get settled in. But by doing it at 9:30 in each person's time zone, that means that as soon as my California person comes online, even though it's 12:30 for me, I'm getting her update for what's on her plate for that day and what she accomplished yesterday. And of course, standard operating procedures and expectations. Again, these are best practices for traditional environments, and they're never more important than when you have a virtual environment. Now, one of these that I really like to emphasize is that standard operating procedures has really gotten a bad rap over the years. We think of them as these really thick binders, that we wrote all these processes down and then nobody ever looks at them again. So I really like to use the word expectations instead. And that's going to be really clearly communicating what are you working on, what are your due dates, and how are we going to stay in touch when we're not in the same office. One of these is also establishing what good communication and bad communication looks like in a virtual environment. So it might be appropriate on instant messaging to be really casual and to use text message kind of jargon, LOLs and emojis and stuff like that. That's perfectly fine for text communication or instant messaging, but you'll want to make it clear to your team that when you start to move your communication to email, then you should still use traditional business communication in that written format. And then finally, I always recommend don't be a hermit when it comes to working at home. Still get out of your house. Take advantage of the fact that you don't have a commute by using that time to go for a walk around the block. Still go out to lunch. Connect with your community, because it's really tempting sometimes to stay indoors all the time and just work and miss that environmental connection. So finally, tools for communicating, and this falls into that whole bucket of tools. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about video conferencing, and to me, this is the game changer when it comes to working virtually. Now, if your organization is not yet ready to make this leap, but you want to take a baby step, you can use tools like Zoom for one-to-one meetings for free, and it's very seamless. It's very easy to use. We use Zoom. I think it's much easier for both the users and the participants than some of the other tools. That's personal preference. And even things like WebEx, GoToMeeting, and Skype, which are more traditional, they've been around for quite a long time, their videos usability has come a long way. And I will say that video has made all the difference, because when you're seeing each other face to face, one, you have that accountability we talked about. Two, you're still getting to know each other. You can create your own water cooler. When you're talking to each other face to face over the computer, you can do what you would normally do in an office, which you might say, hey, Amber, is that a new shirt? That color looks great on you. Or Jason, did you get a haircut? I like it. It looks really cool. And that's the same thing that you would do in an environment if you're working face-to-face that you often can miss out on by being virtual. So video really helps with that camaraderie and breaking down those barriers. And then when it comes to working with your client, or for example, in the proposal environment, or just any kind of status meeting, video conferencing ensures that you know people are paying attention and they didn't mute the phone line and they're secretly answering emails or text messaging. You're able to see their face. It keeps them accountable to you and vice versa. As you can tell, I love video. Instant messaging, my second favorite thing. We use Slack. I love Slack. It's really easy to use. You can hashtag things. You can find them. You can integrate with social media. You can do a lot of great things. Even with the free version of it, which is still what we use as a small company, you can do amazing things with Slack. I know that many of these other tools have the same features or similar, and Skype also has instant messaging as well. Instant messaging is great it's the equivalent of walking down the hall and popping into somebody's office. So think of it that way. Any message that you would just knock on someone's door and say, hey, I have a quick question, that's what instant messaging is for. And then scheduling. Similarly, scheduling can just drive you nuts. 20 emails just to determine what time are we going to have our status call. Then you still have to have the status call. Scheduling face-to-face can be easier. You walk into somebody's office and you say, hey, are you free for a call tomorrow? Yeah. What time? 2 o'clock? Yeah, works for me, and you're done. Over email, that might be 20 emails. So we use something like Calendly, which enables you to give set parameters for when you're available and let the other person choose. Or Doodle, which is really great for getting consensus. You can put out 6 different options for a happy hour time slot, let people pick the ones that work for them, and majority rules. We really love Calendly and Doodle. Next, of course, is cloud document and management. Now, you can't really be a virtual company if you're not working in the cloud at least part of the time. So, and that may still be that you're using a VPN connection to log into a server, but we see that more and more companies, even big traditional companies that are kind of slow moving, are really moving to the cloud for all or some of their document management. Now, we use SharePoint a lot, but we have clients who use Google Docs. We have clients that use Dropbox. Really, the online document management is a little bit tool agnostic. The main thing that you want is the ability to share files easily, to manage security, to have version history, and in some cases, like with Google Docs and SharePoint, I'm not sure about Dropbox to be honest, to co-author documents where you can actually work on them together, which can cut down on the churn as well. Now, project management goes hand in hand with document management. SharePoint does both, but if you're using another tool that doesn't offer project management, meaning things like schedules, milestones, tasking, things like that, there's a lot of really great tools out there. A lot of these are free to try or free for just a few licenses. Basecamp is used heavily in the web design and graphic design world. Teamwork we've used a little bit. It's great for assigning action items, and Trello as well. Again, if your organization is taking baby steps and you're a little bit intimidated by going to a full SharePoint installation, you might try one of these other ones that are free and easy to practice on. And then finally, I mentioned the supporting back office, and you may be thinking, well, what does that really matter? I mean, they're over in corporate, and what does that really have to do with me having a virtual team? Well, we find that it's really important to have a supporting back office to make sure that you're not undermining the premise of being virtual. So, for example, if all the required security training is done at the corporate site and it's done in person, well, how are you going to handle the people that work in different states? Are they going to have to travel in all the time for that? So as much as you can to make your required training online, you're going to really reinforce that virtual environment. Now, we will say, however, that if you do have training that requires a face-to-face or is just going to be more conducive, time those with your quarterly or annual meetings where you can tie those face-to-face. Online timekeeping and expense reports. Hardly anybody owns a fax machine anymore. But we still see companies that think that they're virtual, but require hard copy signatures on things like timesheets. So when at all possible, embrace the online environment that you have or roll those out as well. Same thing goes with HR systems, direct deposits for payroll, and signing documents. If you have to give somebody let's say you're giving them an offer letter to come join your company, have them do a soft signature instead of doing a hard signature and dropping it in the mail. So those are my 10 tips and takeaways for having a successful virtual team. Now 10 sounds like a lot. Oh my gosh, I can't do 10 things, but it's really 3. The first one is buy-in. For us, that means be intentional, get the right people, have the right environment, and have a culture that supports it. That's all about setting yourself up for success. The next one is communication. That's about transparency, your meeting rhythm, and those expectations or standard operating procedures. That's more important forever. We knew communication was important, but in a virtual world, it's everything. And then finally, you need to have the right infrastructure to succeed. Those are your tools. You heard me rave about some of the ones we love. Working in a cloud, whether it's all cloud or mostly cloud environment, and then having that supporting back office. And those are going to be your enabling technologies to have your best virtual team. So thank you so much for listening to this. Again, it's a topic very near and dear to my heart, and let's answer your questions. And I see that we have a few coming in, so let me just open those up. So the first question that everybody always asks is, can we get a copy of the slides? And of course, we will send those out to everybody, and we'll also be asking you to just give us a quick little survey response and let us know how this was. So another question that came in is, do you find that virtual recruiting and virtual teams limits the access to the talent that you can get, or does it actually increase it? So for us, we really find that once we really truly understood that we could be effective virtually, it definitely expanded our scope. So you may find again that you have limitations if you have, let's say, a contractor who's going to require them to work on site with them, let's say in Washington, D.C. Clearly that's going to limit the pool of people that you're going to recruit. But as you're thinking about setting up your team, if you say this team is going to be virtual or this role can be virtual sometimes, you can definitely expand your scope. Some of the best graphic artists that we work with live in Florida, and none of our clients would ever know or suspect because they never have to come on site. Their role doesn't require it. So for us, it works out really, really well. From a cost perspective, that can be really beneficial as well, because if you have a company in a really expensive region like Washington, D.C., New York City, San Francisco, you may find that you're able to get access to extremely talented personnel at a much more affordable salary than you can in those regions. And then finally, just a compliment that we got, which was, thank you so much. This was really helpful. And the 30-minute format is great. And that came from Kelly. So I really appreciate that feedback. We're going to be doing these 30-minute quick hitter webinars every month. They should be on the 3rd Wednesday in most cases, pretty much without fail, give or take a holiday or so. And I believe that our next one is going to be on editing your proposals to fit in Pageloaded. So keep an eye out for that one, and we look forward to having you on the next one. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.